Since she was a child, everyone defined her with big but silent words: reliable, responsible, the one who doesn't cause problems. She was the oldest daughter, the one who cleared the dishes without being asked, the one who mentally calculated discounts at the supermarket while her sister threw expensive cosmetics into the shopping cart as if they were candy. At 29, she was already living on her own, far from that house filled with passive-aggressive gestures and underhanded comparisons. She worked as a software developer from her apartment on the third floor of a building without a doorman, in a neighborhood where silence was as valued as rent. Her life was simple, precise, and finally hers. But when her parents invited her to dinner, to talk as a family, something inside her, which still believed in redemption, accepted. For years, she had been the invisible financial support of the house. She paid for college books that were never read, expired credit cards that weren't hers, and even a complete move that her sister justified with a simple, "It was urgent, I'll transfer you later." But that later never came. When she started setting boundaries, there were no shouts, no complaints. Only emptiness. A meticulously calculated silence, as if everyone in her family had rehearsed erasing her. So that dinner didn't sound like a reconciliation, it sounded like a strategy. Still, it happened. She wore a light gray dress, her favorite, and arrived with an apple tart from her usual bakery, the same one she frequented as a child. She rang the doorbell with one hand and with the other held her purse like someone entering a minefield. The atmosphere in the house was disturbingly cordial. Her mother smiled too much, as if someone had told her it was important to appear affectionate. Her father, always more silent, greeted her with a brief hug, like someone signing something without reading it. Sabrina, her sister, was wearing a powder pink outfit, with a high ponytail that revealed new earrings, expensive, clearly new. On the table, there were napkins already folded like in a fancy restaurant and a pitcher of orange juice in the center, with glasses already poured for each of us. She noticed that her own glass was the only one with a lemon slice. Details. Small details that would make everything else make sense later. For now, she smiled and sat in her old spot, pretending it was just another night. As they served individual lasagnas in bowls, a recipe that, curiously, had never been prepared for her when she lived there, her phone vibrated with a dry buzz on the tablecloth. She glanced at it reflexively, unsuspectingly. It was an unknown number, but the message made her freeze. "Get up and get out of there. Don't say anything to them. Don't drink the juice." At first, she thought it was a macabre joke. She felt her throat immediately close. She looked at her family, her mother casually slicing bread, her father pouring more juice, her sister checking her nails. Another message arrived seconds later. "It's Mark. Don't ask. Just go." Mark. Sabrina's ex. The one she hadn't seen in years. Why would he send her something like that? Why now? Underscore 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 underscore. Mark's words sank like invisible splinters into her spine. She felt the entire dinner become unreal, as if she'd inadvertently walked into a poorly directed scene. She stared at the glass of juice and the lemon wedge. What were the odds of it being true? What kind of people would do something like this to their own daughter? But then she remembered something. A few weeks ago, Sabrina had insisted on seeing her, even showing up at work unannounced, asking if she still used the same banking app. At the time, she'd thought nothing of it. Now, the pieces were starting to fall into place with frightening precision. She'd recently switched her biometric verification system to a more robust one she'd developed herself for internal testing. No one knew that. No one, except someone who wanted to access her money without her permission. He didn't stand up. He didn't make a fuss. He opted for stealth, as if his life depended on it. With a steady pulse on the outside and a sharp tremor on the inside, he took the glass in his left hand, brought it to his lips with theatrical slowness, and pretended to trip over his elbow. The juice spilled onto the beige dining room rug like a sweet fire. His mother immediately stood up to get a towel. His father frowned. Sabrina let out an annoyed exclamation. "How clumsy," he said. She apologized with an embarrassed gesture, but inside, every muscle was awake. She hadn't drunk a drop. Her body was now her best disguise. She finished eating slowly, pretending to be tired, as if the day had been particularly long. When her mother offered her coffee, she shook her head with a weak smile and asked to sit on the couch for a moment. "I'm a little dizzy," she murmured. It was part of the plan that, in less than 5 minutes, she improvised in her programmer's mind, accustomed to thinking in structures and protocols. She leaned back on the couch like someone surrendering to fatigue, parted her lips, and let one arm fall to her side. She didn't close her eyes completely, she barely squinted, just enough to perceive movements, shadows, intentions. She wouldn't have believed what came next if she hadn't heard it with her own ears. First, the footsteps. Quick, coordinated. Then, the low, urgent voices. Her sister whispered, "She's out. Hurry, Dad." Her mother said something about the sleeping pill's duration, and then she felt her arm moved, her finger placed on her phone. The fingerprint recognition failed. They tried again. Again. She heard her father say, "Didn't it work with the fingerprint? Haven't you tried this before?" Sabrina responded, irritated, "Yeah. But it must have changed something. This nerd never leaves anything the same." What they didn't know was that the phone was in decoy mode. A visual clone, a fake app identical to the real one, but with no access to any accounts. She had activated it months ago, out of instinct, out of experience, out of caution. And now, it was becoming her salvation. As she remained motionless, her breathing barely modulated so as not to give herself away, she heard the click of the cell phone being placed on the table. Her mother asked, "What if we call someone who knows how to unlock this? A technician?" But it was her father who responded with something that made her shudder, "No. If we don't get it today, we'll invite her back tomorrow. But this time we'll lock her up before she suspects anything." The cruelty of the phrase pierced her like a pin under her skin. They were hunting her like an animal. It wasn't about money anymore. It was the contempt with which they spoke of her. As if she weren't their daughter. As if she were merely a means, a resource. As if her efforts over all those years had meant nothing. But they weren't alone. As they fell into their own trap, the microphone built into her watch, activated remotely from her laptop that very morning, recorded every word. Every unlock attempt, every whispered conversation, every involuntary admission. She'd set up a backup system with cloud access, encrypted audio, real time. She knew it seemed like paranoia, but for someone who had worked in cybersecurity, paranoia was common sense. When they were convinced they wouldn't accomplish anything that night, they covered her with a blanket and left her on the couch. She pretended to snore softly, and as soon as they walked away to the kitchen, she opened her eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She only knew there was no turning back. She waited for almost half an hour, counting their breaths, memorizing their steps, listening to them laughing softly in the kitchen as they talked about their vacation and how much they could be relieved once the problem with her was solved. Then, with the precision of someone defusing a bomb, she silently stood up, grabbed her purse, put her cell phone away, and crossed the hall toward the front door. Her bare feet made no sound on the parquet. No one saw her leave. She ran down the stairs, holding her breath, with a dangerous calm, and didn't breathe a sigh of relief until she was inside her car, with the locks on and the engine running. She didn't look back. She accelerated straight toward her apartment, and as she drove, the trembling she had suppressed for hours began to take hold of her hands. She didn't sleep that night. She downloaded the entire audio file, reviewed it word by word, and prepared a physical copy and a digital copy on a password-protected flash drive. At 7:45 a.m., she was already at the door of the Central Police Station, her hair tied back, her face clean, and a blue folder under her arm. She asked to speak to the cybercrime officer and presented everything: the recording, Mark's message, records from the failed biometric recognition system, and even the name of the sleeping pill supplier, which she deduced after a quick search. There was no need to exaggerate. The data spoke for itself. The officer who attended to her changed his tone when he heard the part where her father suggested locking her up next time. That's when she knew this wasn't just an attempted fraud. It was a conspiracy. An entire family operating like a small criminal organization. The trial process began quickly. Contrary to what many believe, there was no spectacle or headlines. Everything was hushed, as if the system understood the sensitivity of the case. Her parents and sister were summoned to testify without warning. They denied everything at first, of course. But it took only a few seconds of the recording played in the courtroom for the prosecutor to stand up and request precautionary measures. They tried to cry, to say it was all a misunderstanding, that she was getting revenge for feeling excluded. But the audio file contradicted them sentence by sentence. The justice system was surgical: a year of probation for each of them, fines for attempted fraud and biometric impersonation, hours of community service, and, most importantly, a total and indefinite restraining order. It wasn't a victory with applause. There were no hugs or sense of triumph. Just a different kind of silence. One that didn't hurt. One that finally didn't consume her. She changed her number, her internet provider, even her bank. She changed locks, deleted old photos, and moved cities with the same serenity with which others changed their hairstyle. It was hard. Not because of losing them, but because of accepting that she never had them. Sometimes she stared into space in her new salon and wondered if she'd ever stop triple-checking that the door was properly closed. But over time, that habit faded too. Like the pain fades from a wound that has finally healed without oozing. Months passed, and little by little, she found herself again. She rediscovered simple pleasures, walking alone in the rain without having to tell anyone, buying flowers for her desk, programming for pleasure rather than necessity. She enrolled in a course on artificial intelligence applied to the healthcare sector, something she'd always been interested in but had put off because it wasn't the right time. Without ties, without anyone draining her emotional energy, her creative capacity flourished like fertile ground after a fire. For the first time, the money she earned was hers alone. She saved it, invested it, enjoyed it. There were no more envelopes with other people's bills, no more late-night transfers to family accounts that never returned a "thank you." One day, while waiting in line at a downtown coffee shop, she saw her. It was Sabrina. She was wearing an apron with a supermarket chain logo, her eyes sunken, her makeup half applied. Her sister didn't see her. Or maybe she did, and pretended not to. There was no confrontation, no grandiloquent words, no dramatic scenes. Just a fleeting glance and the silent acknowledgement that everything had changed. And there, in front of that lukewarm coffee counter, she understood that she didn't need revenge. That true closure didn't come from watching others fall, but from being able to live without fear, without guilt, without emotional debt. It was as if she was finally breathing clean air after years of swallowing smoke. She never spoke to any of them again. Not a single message. Not a single postcard. Not even for the holidays. At first, some cousins tried to contact her, because family isn't perfect, but it's the only one we have. She didn't respond. And over time, they too faded away. The absence became a habit, and in that habit, she found an unexpected peace. Because cutting ties with those who hurt you isn't selfish. It's a survival instinct. Therapy helped her understand that what she had experienced wasn't simply a complicated family, but a structure of manipulation sustained for years, disguised as affection and need. Every so often, someone would ask her if she missed her parents. And the answer was always the same, but never spoken out loud. She missed the version of them she'd once imagined. The one where love was selfless, where helping wasn't a trap, where being a daughter didn't mean being used. But that version never existed. It only lived in her head, like a fabricated memory to justify the unjustifiable. And letting go of. That was perhaps the hardest part. More than the complaint, more than pretending to be asleep, more than moving out on her own. Accepting that love doesn't always come from where it should, that was what truly made her an adult. Sometimes, on quiet nights in front of the screen, she wrote lines of code that took her to places that didn't exist, worlds where mistakes could be corrected simply by recompiling. And she thought about how different everything would be if human relationships had an undo button. But real life has no shortcuts. There's no command line for forgiveness. Nor enough logic to explain why someone decides to betray the one who helped them the most. Yet there was something liberating in not looking for further explanations. In simply accepting that it wasn't her fault. That she did the best she could with what she had. That she survived an emotional ambush without becoming a bitter version of herself. Over time, she turned part of her story into a talk for young women in technology, how to protect themselves digitally and personally. Without naming names, without exposing details, but with a firm conviction that knowledge saves. The girls listened in silence as she explained how a password can be the difference between independence and abuse, between autonomy and control. And although at first she thought talking about it would make her relive it all, she discovered that by telling it from a place of strength, something within her was restored. It was as if, by sharing her story, others were also encouraged to set boundaries. And that, for her, was victory enough. A year after the trial, she received an unexpected email. It was from Mark, Sabrina's ex-boyfriend, the same man who had saved her that night with a simple message. He wasn't looking for thanks, he just wanted to let her know that the family was still talking about her, trying to play the victim in front of acquaintances. "Don't worry, no one believes them anymore," he wrote. That brief sentence made her smile. Not out of revenge, but because it confirmed what she already sensed, the truth, sooner or later, will come out. She responded with a few words, thanking him for that warning, without which she might not be alive or free. In her new life, she began to collect small routines that had previously gone unnoticed, having breakfast on the balcony in the morning sun, turning off her cell phone on Sundays, buying plants to decorate her living room. They were simple gestures, but each one held a profound meaning, proof that she wasn't accountable to anyone else. The feeling of freedom was so intense that she sometimes found herself crying when she heard an old song on the radio, not from sadness, but from relief. She had achieved something that, years before, had seemed impossible, building a life without invisible chains. One Saturday afternoon, while walking through a park with her laptop in her backpack and headphones plugged into her favorite podcast, she stopped in front of a wall full of post-its that read, "What would you leave behind if no one claimed it?" Without thinking, she pulled out a small yellow piece of paper and wrote, "The times I was made to feel selfish for saying no." She stuck it down along with hundreds of others. For the first time, she felt that her story, though painful, was part of something bigger. That she wasn't the only one who had been used, manipulated, blamed for being the one who set the boundaries. And that, too, was silently healing her. She had started writing an anonymous blog where she shared reflections on emotional autonomy and family boundaries. She did so under a simple pseudonym, but each post touched hundreds of people. Young women wrote to her with similar stories, seeking guidance, comfort, or simply a space to be heard without judgment. What had once been her open wound was now her driving force. And although she sometimes felt the burden of reliving certain moments, she knew she was transforming the pain into something useful. She hadn't planned it this way, but she ended up becoming a beacon for those still navigating the darkness of guilt disguised as love. One afternoon, in a small downtown bookstore, she was flipping through a book on ethical programming when she heard someone whisper her name. Turning, she saw her mother, older, with thinning hair and a pharmacy bag in her hand. For a moment, the air seemed thick. They didn't say anything. They just stared. Her mother tried to take a step forward, but she moved away, silently. Not out of hatred, but out of self-respect. She had learned that not every relationship deserves a second chance. She left the store with her heart pounding, but without any doubts. That scene sealed something inside her, the certainty that she had done the right thing, even when it hurt. That night, when she got home, she made some hot soup, turned on her favorite lamp, and checked her blog posts. A 22-year-old woman had written, "Thank you for sharing your story. I thought I was crazy for feeling this way about my family." She responded, "You are not alone. You are not wrong. Sometimes being strong means knowing when to walk away." She calmly closed her laptop. She looked at herself in the hall mirror. She was no longer the daughter who waited for approval. She was a woman who, against all odds, had saved herself. And that was priceless. As time passed, she stopped counting the days since she last saw them. She no longer needed to measure the distance in weeks or forgotten birthdays. She had accepted that some wounds heal not with reconciliation, but with firm boundaries. That sometimes justice doesn't come in the form of prison, but with personal freedom. She lived peacefully, confident in the knowledge that she had done what she had to do. She didn't have all the answers, but she did have peace. And that was enough. She had learned to take care of herself like no one else had ever done for her. And that, too, was love, even if it didn't seem like it at first. She never returned to that house. Not even to collect objects from her past. Everything that mattered, she carried inside, her integrity, her courage, her story. Sometimes she walked past a supermarket and wondered if her sister was still there, if she had understood anything about everything that had happened. But she didn't look for answers. Because, for the first time in her life, she didn't need to understand others to be at peace with herself. She had left without shouting, without explaining, without asking permission. And in that steadfast silence, she had found everything that had always been denied to her: respect, control, and a life that, finally, was hers.